This most recent OTA is what every OTA should aspire to be in Marvel Snap, addressing big problems while making old cards better. Red Hulk is, of course, the big problem that is being addressed. This is a card that I think many people viewed as a little bit too strong. Releasing as a 6/11 that gained 4 power every time your opponent passed the turn with energy available, this is now going to a 6/9, which is actually one of the two options that I pitched on the most recent episode of 8 Cubes. It was either take it to 6/9, keep the ability the same, or make it like 6/12, give it +3 on the proc. I think the way they decided to do it is an investment in the feel of Red Hulk. It's saying we like the gameplay pattern that this card has, we just don't want it to be as strong. They noted in the patch notes that they expected the fact that he was revealed to your opponent to reduce his cube rate significantly. They also noted that this did not happen. The fact that this did not happen does sort of raise some questions as to why it didn't happen, because I think a lot of people are going to jump to this didn't happen because Marvel Snap players are bad and don't know how to retreat. But I think the other thing this card is doing that can sneakily gain cubes is putting a giant neon sign in front of your opponent that says, hey, play around this, and then you end up playing something totally different, totally not Red Hulk. As far as whether this nerf was deserved, I think it was undeniably deserved. Red Hulk had a top 5 play rate in the game, which is bonkers for a new card, because not everyone even has it at this point, or even has the chance to get it based on the economy. So to have a play rate comparable to cards like Shang-Chi, comparable to cards like Jeff, is monstrous. It was very clearly the best in slot 6-drop. There were decks that would not normally play 6-drops that were just playing this card for the sake of it being very good. And once again, it's an L I have to take. For the third time running, I think, I have fundamentally underestimated how good it is to just win one lane. And I hope we keep that in mind, because I'm not making this mistake again. I made this mistake with Eliath. I made this mistake with Red Hulk. I made this mistake with Blob. You could argue I made this mistake with Cannonball. Winning one lane is really good. The next time I see a giant card come out that says basically win one lane, invalidate whatever was here previously, I'm going to remember those mistakes and I'm going to try to learn from them. If you ever catch me saying the phrase, but it's just one lane though, I want you to ignore me. This was an absolutely deserved nerf. It was a card that was, I think, quite an outlier. And I think, on the one hand, it's a good thing that they're willing to nerf cards that recently came out. It means that there's no like explicit power creep here. They're willing to say, like, look, we know you paid for this. We're going to reel it back in a bit, though. Like, we have to. On the other, because there's no refunds, I think they have to be a little bit cautious in terms of how they deal with these cards. And I just hit the mic. I think they were appropriately cautious in this instance. They were the correct amount of cautious. This card will still have its identity as maybe the biggest 6-drop. It is still going to be like that, and it will still be played in all the spots that it's currently played now. It just won't be as overpoweringly large, and not being as overpoweringly large is probably the right thing for the game right now. Now, there is a further concern, though, and that is the concern of people who purchased this card and will not be receiving any refunds for it. Because I think they went so light on him, I'm not overly concerned with that in this case. This is not a Werewolf by Night nerf where he is suddenly not even close to the same card, or a Zabu nerf, which is a sort of similar thing. This guy is very much the same card he was. I will say it's sort of similar to the Blob nerf, another card that released extremely powerful, and after the nerf was still played in all the spots it was played, until Thanos ended up kind of just going the way of the dodo. Now, Red Hulk will still be good, I think, but I think there is one final concern that I would like to bring up, which is Red Hulk decks have been sort of attacked out of the meta by Profex, Cannonball, Sentry, and Annihilus decks, and I hope that they are aware of and prepared to deal with those decks in future patches, because dealing with Red Hulk now is good, but post-White Widow, the meta has definitely moved in a different direction, which means, and to be clear, I think it should have already moved that direction, White Widow or no White Widow, but it does mean that there are other balance concerns that should be on their radar that are not addressed by dealing with Red Hulk. Overall, deserved nerf, good nerf, maybe about a week behind, but I think only being about a week behind is fine. And I think you can actually say Red Hulk at 6'9 feels like this is the right spot for the card. Next up is US Agent gaining another negative power on his ability. Now he's going to be a 2/3 with the ability to afflict big guys with -4 power instead of -3. And I think, happy about this. Of all the cards that have released recently, US Agent has certainly been the most dud of them. And it's good that they're focusing on the duds and not just bringing down things like Red Hulk. They're saying, like, look, we know people bought this card. We don't necessarily think it's that far off. They mentioned in the patch that his numbers aren't bad, but they're also not good enough. And so there's a buff to US Agent in here. The weird thing about this for me is just timing, right? Like, I keep seeing them do stuff like this, and now that US Agent is buffed, let's say he ends up really good. I don't know if he will. I have no idea. But if he does, it's very hard for people to acquire him. You end up having a sort of trajectory similar to Cannonball and Pixie, where people are like, well, I got all the other cards around him. You're telling me I needed to get this guy too? And on the one hand, I can see how that's beneficial for Marvel Snap as a game. They want you to feel like any card you get can be worth getting. But on the other hand, when so many decks in Marvel Snap are just, here's 12 good cards, and they release a bunch of really good cards all the time, which I think they have been doing, you end up in a spot where it's like, how do I play this deck that is all 12 good cards when it needs 3 cards from the last month? And those 3 cards are unique and good and hard to replace. And I think this is a consequence of something that Glenn Jones mentioned when he was on either the Snapshot or this YouTube channel, which was that they made some changes to testing, right? I think whatever those changes to testing were, they have resulted in overwhelmingly better balance in terms of cards getting nerfed. Before this patch, Red Hulk is the first card that they have released that has been nerfed within the time frame of its release, basically. And since, I guess you'd say, the Blob nerf is sort of where I'd ballpark it, they have consistently released strong cards that are not immediately over the line. And I think when they release so many strong cards that are not getting nerfed, and compare this to the previous 6 months, which had Loki and Miss Marvel and Werewolf by Night and Mobius and Blob, just so many cards that had to get really, really damaged. I didn't even mention Elsa. Ridiculous, right? And when you think about how those cards had to fundamentally change, and then how, like, their nerf to Red Hulk is like, well, let's just take 2 power off of it, right? It's very clear that they're better at designing a card to be just good enough to not get severely nerfed, which is a good thing. It's an objectively good thing. They want these cards to be desirable. But I worry that the economy is not built to sustain that. Because when so many decks in Marvel Snap are just collection of good cards, and when so many of the just generic good cards are very recent cards, you end up in this situation where it's like, oh man, I got this card, I should have gotten this other card, but even if I got this other card, I would have needed 2 other new cards in order to play, deck A here, right? Like, give an example of the Pixie deck that was running around that's playing, it's playing Pixie, it's also playing Red Hulk, right? And you kind of need both of them. It's like, oh man, that's really awkward, right? We need both of these cards, and then if one of them gets changed, maybe something doesn't work, if the meta shifts, it feels like they're doing a great job of releasing powerful and relatively balanced cards for how powerful they are, and that the economy is just not built to keep up with that. And I worry that, this is doing the sort of same thing. It's like, all right, well, US Agent released week. What if this card ends up good? Is the economy built to keep up with that? What if US Agent is like an amazing card now, like Gladiator post buff, and just no one can get him except for tokens? And that is a pain point that I feel like should be addressed at some point. Boy, I gotta tell you, I do not get this one. I don't get it at all. I actually think you could find me in the official Marvel Snap Discord being like, can you think of a buff more useless than Jean Grey to 3/4? I get their logic here. They mentioned it as okay, it's a potential counter to Annihilus, it's a potential counter to Hela. Let's just put some power into her and see where she goes. And I agree, it is a potential counter to those strategies, kind of, maybe. It's something worth exploring. I obviously haven't explored it because it's Jean Grey, right? There were people playing Jean Grey Alioth stuff into the peak of Hela, but we've already found far more efficient ways of dealing with Hela, like with Clog decks, than Jean Grey is. So I'm not really sure what she's going to do. If someone can figure out something that is good into Clog with her, that is a real starting point. Like, I think beating Clog, just having a deck that's like, I beat Clog, is a really good thing to be right now. And so if someone is able to figure that out with Jean Grey, this could end up mattering. I think my real thing with her is I'm just not really sure how much this point of power matters. My instinct with Jean Grey is that her ability is just such a drawback in a world where people are playing Kitty Jeff stuff that you end up being unable to properly use her the way you would want to. And if someone can beat Clog with this, obviously let me know, because I would love to have that kind of edge on the metagame. But I worry that you're just going to be in a spot where it's like, aha, I've invested in this Jean Grey, and your opponent is going to be in a spot where they're like, aha, I have played the card Loki, and you're just like, oh, cool, I'm not going to be able to beat that. And I think Jean Grey going to 4 power doesn't really alleviate those issues, it just gives her 4 power. I don't really think this is going to do a lot for this card. And I really wish it would, because she is a super cool character. And it is almost a little bit sad that she has seen the amount of play that she has. I gotta say, I love this one. Stature going to 5/7. This is just a great thing to happen here. I cannot praise them enough for this, because one of the things that I get all the time is they should revert the Black Bolt and Stature nerfs. And I think that for those who are unaware, Black Bolt used to have 8 power, Stature used to have 7. And one of the things I always say in response to that is they shouldn't revert those nerfs. They should just put all the power on Stature, because Stature is the more interesting of the 2 cards. When you make Black Bolt a 5/8 and Stature a 5/7, you end up just saying run Black Bolt in everything. That sucks. It's boring. It's not fun. No one wants to do that. Everyone hates getting their cards discarded. You insert your sandcastle meme here, right? But if you put the power on Stature, there are 2 things that happen. First, you don't have to be a Black Bolt deck. Silver Samurai, Moon Knight, those cards exist too. There's more things to do with this. It is overwhelmingly likely to be a Black Bolt thing, but that's beside the point. Fundamentally, there are more options for this card than just Black Bolt, right? I think that this is the right way to go about buffing stuff generally, right? Buff the payoff. You want to buff the payoff. You buff the reward for doing it. You don't buff the setup. When you buff the setup to the point that the setup is independently good, the payoff becomes a free roll. When you buff the payoff, you end up actually playing a unique and interesting deck. And the fact that they just buffed Stature and didn't buff Black Bolt shows me that they understand this too. I am a big fan of how this is turning out. Honestly, though, if it were me, I would have put Stature to 5/8. I think buffing the payoff is so good that I want to do it twice. Like, people are like, you could revert Black Bolt Stature and it would be balanced. Yeah, but wouldn't it be cooler if you, instead of reverting Black Bolt Stature, just put all the points onto the Stature? That's the cool part. That's the part that has multiple hooks into other strategies, not Black Bolt. And I think that that is really, 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 really cool. I think it's cool that they identified the Stature thing. I think it's cool that they're buffing her again. And I think it's especially cool they're not buffing Black Bolt. I'm a big fan of everything about how they managed this. Shout out to Stature. I cannot wait to try some Black Bolt Stature decks. I don't know how good they are right now, because I think there's a lot of competition at the 5-drop spot. Like, when I think about playing Black Bolt Stature, I think, okay, what's my competition? Sentry Annihilus, Cannonball Profex. That's really stiff competition. That's really hard to be like, yes, that's a thing I want to try to compete with. It's difficult. It's difficult to compete with those packages. But in a future world, I can see this being relevant, because honest to God, I do think something from that package probably has to eat a nerf at some point. So this is definitely a good thing to have in your back pocket. Just, I wouldn't get too excited about this. Remember, it was like almost a year ago the last time this stuff was good. The meta has definitely sort of gone past it, and I do think that, there's some stuff right now that will probably end up eventually getting tuned down, that while it exists, you should probably be doing it. Mantis, a 1/2 now. Mantis has been on like a real journey. Like, she's been everywhere on the 1/2 possible situation. Like, she's gone everywhere. She's been a 1/2, she's been a 2/2, she's been a 2/3. She's had multiple abilities. Eventually they were just like, what if she's just a 1/2 again? Her new ability doesn't seem all that strong, and I think that's probably true. Outside of some hot locations, this has basically never seen real play. I'm interested to see if it does end up seeing play in something like Loki, because I think this ability is sort of sneaky good. It's just, it's gated by the Guardians part of it, right? Like the fundamental issue, hit the mic again, with this ability is the clause attached to it, not the ability that itself. And I honestly kind of wonder if this card was just like a 2/2 that said the ability, would it, like, it would just like copy the last card your opponent played, right? Would that even be OP? Like when you compare that to Cable, which actually takes the card from your opponent's deck, when you compare that to Mirage, which gives power, would that actually be OP, or would that just be like totally fine? I kind of think it would be like good, but not OP, right? It would just be like a good card, a very good card even. And I think it would be nice to see Mantis do that. Unfortunately, her flavor as a member of the Guardians of the Galaxy kind of dictates that she's always going to be like this, and that means I think she's always going to be kind of fringy. I do like to see them taking an interest in this card. I like it because she is the most interesting of the Guardians of the Galaxy, because she's the one that doesn't do the thing all the other ones do. But I don't think, as long as she is a Guardian, there's a good way to make this make sense, unfortunately. I think she's going to remain a fairly fringe card that is useful in sort of super hyper-specific situations, but not the kind of card that very often makes the cut in your 12. This one's pretty sick. Jane Foster, the Thor package is already like kind of playable, right? Like it's not the best thing you can do with Angela, but it's not the worst thing you can do with Angela. And I think the Thor package has this unique way of playing where it is very able to set these scalers down in lanes that makes it very difficult to Professor X, which is a good thing right now. Basically, I think this package is already underexplored, and this buff to Jane Foster should really get people tinkering with what is actually probably a pretty good deck already. I am going to try Jane Foster. Like, this is a card that I am absolutely going to try to play at some point. It might just be, you know, I might just try it and then be like, okay, I'm going back to Loki. Yeah, I know I'm KM best after all, right? But I am excited for this. This kind of stuff where you go, like, just having the ability to play what I like to call Sarah-less Sarah. You play Thor, you play Bill, you play Jane, you play a billion power on the final turn with whatever interaction you want. Both of the hammers are effectively 0/6s. You have any interaction you could plausibly look for. You have multiple scalers on the board, so it's very difficult to Professor X you. There's just a lot going for a deck like this. And I think if it has one weakness, that would probably be the card Cannonball, which is a difficult thing to deal with, I think almost for certain. But this is a very compelling and interesting package right now with a very good nut draw. The nut draw in this deck is better than a lot of other decks. It's a very solid competitive points package right now, and I am really interested to see what it can do, because this amount of scalers is a legitimate way to combat Professor X. I have been playing a discard deck with Killmonger in it, and the whole point of playing that deck is you just get to drop scalar, scalar, scalar. There's nowhere for you to profitably Professor X. I'm going to win this game, right? And that is a really big deal right now. It's important to be able to say that into the face of decks that are predicated on, you know, Professor X Cannonball, that you can't Professor X. That's a really big deal. And I think Jane Foster decks with Thor and Bill are a plausible way to approach that. I mean, you know, another plausible way to approach that matchup is to play the card Loki, but yeah, that's neither here nor there. This is definitely something that I'm interested in seeing what it does. Of course, going to 9 power is, I would say the 9th point of power is actually like maybe the most impactful point of power you can get, because it shows the devs are like, all right, we're pushing this to the maximum. Because you can go to 10, you get Shang-Chi. You go to 9, it's like, all right, we're gonna really ramp up this card right now. And I think that is a smart thing to do, an interesting thing to do, and I cannot wait to play a little bit of Jane Foster. So, how do I feel about this patch as a whole? Good. I think this is what patches should look like. Assuming they lock these patches in like a week before the patch time, I think that this is exactly what this patch should have looked like. This is what I would have done a week ago, right? What you do is you deal with the biggest problem, that's Red Hulk, and then you say, what other cards can I bring up to the standard of today? And I think that's something I wanted to talk about if you'll, you know, give me the time, right? And that is one of the solutions to the problem I detailed talking about US Agent, the release of just too many good cards, right? Is to buff cards that already exist. When people talk about power creep, the implication is that it invalidates older cards, and that doesn't need to be true. It doesn't need to be true in a digital game like Marvel Snap because they can go back and make those older cards good. And that is what they've done in this patch. Every patch should be this. It should be deal with the biggest problem in the metagame, buff, 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 buff older cards. They should all be like this. This is what it has to be. Like, honest to God, they should be like 75% buffs to older cards at this point. That is how much better every card they've been releasing is. Like, not in terms of like the gap between good and bad, because it's actually like there are very few actually bad cards in Marvel Snap. It's like most cards are like a power or two away from being playable. But in terms of the sheer volume of good cards they've been releasing, right? Like, if I can actually say, hey, look, this Jane deck, really good. You don't need Cannonball. You don't need Annihilus. You can just play Jane, Thor, and Bill. That's just like so much more approachable, right? Like, you can actually get a good deck by buffing these older cards. The Stature that everyone probably already has, right? That is exactly what they need to do. I think that this patch is what patches need to look like under the new era of Marvel Snap, where they are clearly better at balancing to the degree that they are releasing banger after banger after banger, and it feels like the economy isn't built to accommodate banger after banger after banger. It's built to accommodate like one banger a month and then like 3 Dakins, right? Like, it's built to accommodate that. It's not built to accommodate, you need like, oh my god, all these cards are ridiculous. Like, I think basically ever since Corvus Glaive, like Corvus Glaive Proxima, that run and the run they've been on, it's just been like, these are all good and playable meta cards, and they are all coming out immediately, and some of them are run together, and it's just like, oh my god, that is so much to buy. And I think the only way you really have to combat that, short of series drops, which they've already said are not going to be super common, the only way you have to combat that is buffing old cards. It has to happen. And so this is what patches have to look like. They have to be deal with the biggest problem, buff, 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 buff. That's what it has to be. I'm glad this one looks like this. I hope more patches look like this in the future, because that is a big looming issue, I think, for Marvel Snap. And obviously, like, I have made no secret of like, hey, Glenn Jones, hire me, and the fact that I like stream this game for a living and make YouTube videos on it for a living. I want it to succeed. I want good things to happen for the game. Like, I'm invested in this, and I think in doing what they're doing in a patch like this, it is necessary for the health of the game. Buffing these older cards, making sure it's not explicit power creep, making sure some of these older cards can actually still be good, like they did with Angela, right? But, you know, the issue with Angela is you kind of need Elsa, Hope, and Kitty, so, you know, does that really even count, right? You gotta do this. And I think, honestly, I just want to see more of this. I want every patch to be this. All right, y'all. Thanks for bearing with me. As always, I've been Cam Best, and you have been phenomenal. Thank you so much for making it to the end of this video. If you did make it, please like and subscribe. It does help me a ton. I love seeing the numbers go up, but also I love doing this as a job, and I'm really grateful for the support that I get. So if you've just been watching for a while, you know, I'm grateful for that. But also hit those buttons. Hit those buttons. You got it. You hit the button. Hit the button.